to see this very clearly today. If the church is going to actually be the church of Jesus Christ, then it must have love in its core. It must be essentially a group of people who are learning how to love, making all the applications of love in their lives, treating each other and others with love. And so this is the one essential thing. So last week we saw an interesting dynamic that could easily be missed going into the chapter. Hyperbolin hadas, which means what? What does that mean? Hyperbole is the word we get from hyperbolin, but what does hyperbolin hadas mean, Dora? That's what hyperbole is, but what does the Greek mean? What was that all about? The high road. There you go. The journey over the mountain, which has large implications, that it's not an easy task. But the view from the top is amazing. So that's why people climb mountains, is for the view from the top. And so this is what we're being challenged to do, that this is the highest road. So when that plays out in our lives, we always have choices what road we're going to take. You can take the high road, you can take the low road. Most of us take the low road because it's easier. But the consequences and the results are very, very different. If you choose the high road, you end up with victory, you end up becoming what you should be. If you take the low road, then you're not going to become what you're challenged to be. So we talked a lot about that last week. We're moving now into the actual text, 1 Corinthians 13. We're going to look at verses 1 to 3, but let's have that. Jasmine, if you would read that for us.
If I speak in tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only resounding songs and clinging cymbals. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and knowledge, and I have all faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I'm nothing. If I give all my possessions to the poor and give over my body to hardship, that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Keep going?
No, yeah, go through the whole chapter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It's not proud. It does not dishonor others. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrong. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, they will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but in part we are. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put away childhood behavior behind me. For now we see only a reflection as a mirror. When we shall see the face to face, now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known.
Okay, and so we have this chapter that defines love for us. It shows us all the characteristics of it. But before we actually go there to explore how love should be presented in our lives and through us, we have to settle the reality that Paul first addresses here. In the first 3 verses, he uses a bit of a formula. Though I do something, if I don't have love, I'm nothing. If I do this, if it's not girded by and grounded in love, it's useless. It has no value whatsoever. Now, remember that he's coming directly out of a discussion of spiritual gifts in the church. Chapter 12, he talks about all the different variety of gifts, how we are to pursue these things, and because Corinth was really into the gifts, and the gifts were in full swing. They were operating in the gifts to such a point that they're actually overstepping the proper use of some of these gifts. But he's talking about something that has to be the framework for gifts and essentially for the church. There must be a grounding in love. So his reference here to the languages of tongues of men and of angels has to do with spiritual gifts. He's talking specifically about those gifts in the former chapter. He's not suggesting that gifts are unimportant. He's not suggesting that they should be done away with. He's not suggesting that gifts are the problem in and of themselves. He gives lots of place for the gifts in the church. But what he says is they have to function in the context of love. And so he jumps right into the deep end of the real issue of Christianity and spirituality. Okay? So when you're thinking about these verses, think in these terms. We have ways that we define spirituality. God has a way that he defines spirituality. His ways are not our ways. His ways are totally about love. So think about this. Someone has powerful spiritual gifting. What is your immediate assumption about that someone? Cliff. They must be close to God. They must be very spiritual indeed, especially if the gifts are authentic. They must really have stepped up to this. They must really have very strong spiritual lives. But that in and of itself kind of flies in the face of the idea of a gift. A gift isn't given based on merit. A gift is given freely. Daddy doesn't buy Princess a new car because she's a great driver. Chances are good she's going to wreck it in a month. Daddy buys Princess a new car because he loves her and she's a spoiled diva. But the truth of the matter is, we as Christians are all spoiled divas. Every good and every perfect gift comes from the Father of lights. Everything we have is from God, by God, because he loves us. You don't deserve anything that you have. I don't deserve anything that I have. My ministry doesn't exist because I'm such a spiritual powerhouse. My ministry exists because God has a sense of humor. Okay? It has nothing to do with character. Some of the critters in the Bible are profoundly spiritually blessed, but really lacking in character. And many, many times through my experience through the years, I've watched men excel in ministry who didn't have much character. And it actually played out over time, and they're no longer with us. Because you can't ultimately live a Christian life without letting God change your character. Okay? But what you and I assume is that if someone has spiritual gifting, they are profoundly spiritual. Okay? Tongues, and there is an escalation here in the gifting that Paul addresses. He speaks of tongues, then he speaks of prophecy, woo, and then mysteries, woo, and then liberality and ultimately martyrdom. You can see there's an escalation in what you and I would classify as spiritual people. And Paul deliberately takes us stepwise through this process of how we define truly spiritual people. And with each one of these steps, he comes to the conclusion that no matter how spiritual you might think you be, without love, you ain't. It is that simple. No matter how gifted, no matter how much you have going for you, without love, you're nothing. Let's apply this to our own lives, because we don't necessarily view ourselves through our gifts. It's generally probably not that prevalent as it was in the Corinthian church, but we have our own metric. We have our own measurement for our spirituality. I pray. I fast. I go on outreach. I'm involved in ministry. I preach. I lead a Bible study. I don't smoke. I don't chew. I don't run with girls that do. We have our metric. We have the way we measure our spirituality, right? We all have a way that we measure, a yardstick that we look at ourselves and we look at others, and we have these methods that we use. And I'm not saying necessarily that they're all invalid, but what I am saying is this: the only real defining one is love. All the other, you can pray till the cows come home, but if you don't have love, your prayers are not powerful and they're not effective. You can fast, you can do all the spiritual gymnastics, you can do everything that we know are good. And remember what I said. Paul is not criticizing spiritual gifts, nor is he or criticizing any of the disciplines or any of the tools that we use to develop our spiritual lives. All he's saying is that everything you do must first and foremost be defined by and be the result of love. Your motive has to be love. The end result, the fruit, has to be love. It has to produce love. And the Reader's Digest version of these 3 verses is, without love, I am nothing, nothing, nothing. That's it. Without love, I am nothing. You can wear the biggest Jesus t-shirt you can find, and without love, you're nothing. So Paul, in his first verse, likens speaking in tongues, making noise spiritually. Without love, he likens that to a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. And there's a lot of nuance in the language here that comes out in all the different commentaries that I've been reading. There's all kinds of different ideas of exactly what Paul is addressing. Let me give you some of these insights because they're helpful. They point us in certain directions. So one very interesting definition or description of this first verse, sounding brass, clanging cymbals. I get this out of a book by a guy named Kenneth Bailey called Paul Through Mediterranean Eyes. Excellent book. He writes these words: before it was destroyed by the Romans in 146 BC, the old city of Corinth was famous across the Roman Empire for its brass and bronze work and for its fine craftsmanship in precious metals. Beginning in 44 BC, while the city was being rebuilt, the brass-making trade almost certainly resumed. In any case, the fame of the early Corinthian brass was legendary, and I've actually heard of Corinthian brass to this day. Many wealthy Romans collected Corinthian bronzes. There is evidence that casting was involved, particularly in the making of large items such as statues, but more common household pieces would naturally have been fashioned by hammering the soft brass. In Aleppo, Syria, a large brass maker's market is still functioning in the center of the city. There, along both sides of a narrow street, one can visit rows of small shops, each about 2 meters, 6 feet, by 3 meters, 9 feet, in size, very small shops. Seated in the street, each craftsman makes and sells his own products. While lecturing in Aleppo in the 1980s, I was interested in visiting this famous market. and initially was obliged to ask for directions as I trudged eagerly down a narrow pedestrian street in the old city. But as soon as I approached from a distance of about a half kilometer, I only needed to follow the racket. On arrival, I found myself in the middle of more than 200 craftsmen hammering slabs of copper or brass into cooking pots, drinking vessels, cheese-making ladles, and the like. Even though all of this craftsmanship was taking place in the open air, the noise was deafening. To talk to any of the skilled workmen, I was obliged to bend down, place my lips within 2 inches of the artisan's ear, and shout at the top of my voice. Certainly, he wasn't practicing social distancing. The noise levels were ear-splitting. As tent makers, Paul, Aquila, and Priscilla would have needed to be present in the marketplace in order to pursue their trade and contact customers. Enduring the high-pitched racket of banging brass would have been a common experience for all Corinthians every time they entered the market. So just use your imagination. Think about that. Think about the noise of 200 men banging on metal with hammers. Okay? And so based on that, what Paul would suggest, taken from that perspective, is that loveless worship is not only an empty thing, but it's literally an annoying thing. It's something you wouldn't want to be near. It's something nobody in their right mind would sign up for. Nobody's going to sit down there with people banging on metal saying, "Oh, I love it here." No, the truth of the matter is, they would flee that kind of environment. And one of the early church fathers, a guy named John Chrysostom, he wrote this in his commentary on Corinthians. In other words, Paul says, if I have no love, I am not just useless, I am a positive nuisance. What a great thing. What a powerful statement. That without love, it's not just that you're not a good Christian, you're an absolute pain in the butt. And there's a reason why nobody wants to be near you. And there's a reason why nobody wants to come to your church. Because your witness has nothing to do with love. It has to do with winning an argument. Your witness has nothing to do with love. It has to do with putting a notch in your belt. Got another one. It's not motivated by love. And if it's not motivated by love, it's not only useless, it's annoying. Think of how annoying it is when someone puts on airs and pretends to be spiritual when you know they're not. It's just annoying. It's like, would you knock that off? You know, they start speaking in King James English. Would you just knock that off? Could we just have a real conversation? Would you get authentic for 30 seconds instead of pretending to be a spiritual giant? Right? We all know how annoying that is. And that's what is implied by the sounding brass and the clanging cymbal if you look at it through that particular lens, the marketplace of hammering out these various metals. This is a great insight. There's another nuance that comes from a different angle. This is out of the commentary, the Complete Biblical Library Commentary. It says brass, the word is chalkos, denotes first metal, copper, and then any object made from it. Here it probably refers to a gong. Sounding, ekon, might be rendered resounding or kind of booming. Tinkling, cymbal, alalazan, is rather clashing, like the sound of heavy cymbals. The sound may be attractive and entertaining. It may be alluring and persuasive. But if action is not motivated by love, it is only noise, sound without a soul. So what this commentator points out is that these were musical instruments. The cymbal was a musical instrument. The gong was a musical instrument. And you know, a well-placed gong in a certain kind of music, it can be very impressive. And it can really get your attention. But if the guy on the gong isn't in sync with the music, and right here, what we need is quiet. Everything's supposed to go, and this guy goes, now's my chance. Boom! Right? You have just destroyed the entire musical piece. Right? You have, and that's what he's talking about. He's saying a musical instrument has its beauty. Tongues, prophecy, gifts, all the different parts of Christianity have their beauty, but if they're not done in love, they're like cymbals that are out of sync. So the beat of the music is just simple 4/4, and there's a guy in the back with the cymbals going, right? That's what you're like. You're discordant. If you are a Christian that isn't living love, motivated by love, you're discordant, which is exactly the opposite of what you're really trying to produce. We're trying to produce harmony, right? We're trying to get this thing in sync. Paul says without love, you'll never get it in sync. You'll have a church full of people with their own ideas who could care less about anyone else. And that's a bad thing. So then there's another nuance. Comes from Cornerstone Biblical Commentary. Corinth manufactured and traded in copper and bronze products. W. Harris has argued persuasively that Paul is most likely referring to hollow, resonating chambers or cylinders made of brass placed strategically around ancient amphitheaters to amplify sound. Such devices would have been used and probably manufactured in Corinth. Thus, the word does not refer to a musical instrument of any type, including a gong, much less a noisy one. Rather, it's a modifying adjective. Ekon suggests a reverberating sound that could in fact be pleasant in tone from an empty vessel. So the idea here is, and I've been in some of these ancient amphitheaters, they were designed with acoustics in mind because they didn't have amplifiers per se. They didn't have microphones, they didn't have electricity. So they would build these amphitheaters in such a way that you could stand right down in front of all these massive, and there were many times they could seat thousands and thousands of people, and you could speak and you would be heard. But it wasn't just the acoustics, it was also these what, does he have a name for it? No, he just says they're resonating chambers or cylinders that were placed strategically. What they would do, imagine the old gramophones. These would be like these brass gramophones that would be placed here and there. They would pick up the sound from the stage and amplify them into the audience. But they themselves were empty. They didn't create any noise. They simply amplified the noise. So again, an interesting thought. If their take on this is true, then these empty brass vessels, all they do is amplify what the nature of the church is. And if the nature of the church is loveless, you've created a horrible monster. And when we look at church history, there are a lot of epics and moments when the church clearly wasn't motivated by love, and the monster that came out of that was a frightening thing. That's because when people are empty, when there's no love in them, then who they are comes out. And what we're watching in our world today is a consequence of a complete breakdown in family love, in societal love, in love, period. People have no comprehension of what love is anymore. And the great problem of that is that we all have to look at ourselves and say, am I part of the problem or am I part of the cure? Do I live a life of love as is defined for us in 1 Corinthians 13? Or am I just an empty amplifier? Do I just amplify all of the problems that surround me? Isn't this interesting? So many different approaches. Here's The Bible Speaks Today. I think it's John Stott who writes this commentary. He says, the inevitable result of not using spiritual gifts in love is that others are offended. There's that nuisance idea. The way Paul puts this is by an oblique reference to the devotees of Greek mystery cults at Corinth, who worshipped Dionysus, the god of nature, and Cybele, goddess of wild animals. Dionysus, the Thracian and Phrygian god of the reproductive energies of nature, was worshipped by orgiastic rites, including the tearing in pieces and devouring of animals, possibly also human sacrifices. Worshippers, especially women, losing their own personality, were identified with him. He tended to specialize as the god of wine. Cybele, the mistress of wild nature, was often shown with lions and other beasts. Phrygia appears to have been the center of her cult, which was introduced into Rome and had great popularity during the early Roman Empire, 1st century AD, especially among women. No doubt, the streets of Corinth resounded with the noisy gongs and clashing cymbals, which were a feature of such pagan worshipers. Okay? A chalkos, gong, was a piece of copper. Cymbalon cymbal was a single-toned instrument, incapable of producing a melody. Both were used in the mystery religions, either to invoke the god or to drive away demons, or to rouse the worshipers. They were neither melodious nor capable of producing harmony. Both beat out a heavy monotone and caused as much offense as constantly barking dogs. But what he's zeroing in on was the mystery cults that were all over Corinth and their use of these symbols and these instruments to summon the worshipers. And so that would imply that Paul says loveless Christianity is at least akin to pagan idolatry. It must at least share certain characteristics with these, we've seen them. We've seen the Hare Krishnas out in the streets, right? That's the same kind of thing. He said Christianity without love is just like that. It's pagan idolatry. Is empty religion idolatrous? You got to ask. It certainly is separated from the true God. And therefore, it is simply a manifestation of man's religious nature. It has nothing to do with a relationship with God, a surrender to God, a love for God. So think about all of these different angles that we're dealing with when Paul uses this metaphor of sounding gongs and clanging cymbals. And each one of them gives us just a little more insight into the problem of Christianity without love. Right? Questions, thoughts, input. Corey.
First thing I thought of, especially with the earlier examples, as far as being annoying, first place I think of is that Westboro Baptist Church organization. Right. They're all about telling everyone they're going to hell, but never telling them how they can avoid going to hell. Right. I mean, it's one thing to tell people you're going to hell, but we're supposed to also tell them how not to get to hell too. But that's never a part of their message. Your message is always about we're not going to hell. You are, haha. And that's the extent of their. That's pretty annoying.
Yeah, these are the groups that have actually protested funerals and with anti-homosexual, placards and screaming against fags and all of that. And, it doesn't matter whether they're addressing a legitimate issue or not. They are not addressing it legitimately. They are not addressing it in love. They have no concern for redemption. Listen, and this, don't trip out on me, but my experience in talking with homosexuals is that there isn't a one of them that didn't get that way without molestation. They are all the product of molestation. And you'll find many homosexual activists actually saying that molestation is a good thing because it unlocked my inner perversion. Okay? The molestation on any level could never be considered a good thing. It's complete abuse. It's totally wrong, and it produces wrong fruit. So here's a person who's now been traumatically scarred. They don't know how to process it. The spirit of the molester has gotten a hold of them, and they don't know that they are dealing with things that a lot of us, thank God, never had to deal with. And we're supposed to hate them? I don't think so. We're supposed to abuse them? I don't think so. I think they've already had enough abuse. We're supposed to help them get free. And this is what Paul says later on in the Corinthians. He says, he speaks of effeminate, he speaks of homosexuality, and he says, such were some of you. But you're not anymore because of the life-changing, wonderful grace of God. Well, this has to come from love. And so Corey is citing a group that, maybe their theology has some validity, but you certainly couldn't call them a Christian group based on what we're looking at. Right? Okay, Alex. And then get a mic over here to Brian.
Yeah, the word needs to be accompanied by love. If it's not accompanied by love, I believe it could be religiosity. Because a lot of people, they know the word, but they don't have the love, the action of it. They have the judgment of it, but not the action of mercy and grace.
Right.
And I find that it goes together with the fruit of the Spirit. If you look at love, you can have the head knowledge of it, but the fruit is not in your life. And all the manifestations of love, joy, peace, kindness, goodness, forgiving and all that stuff that goes with it, that has to be a part of our walk. Because the love is the most important thing in our walk. It just isn't knowing the word and quoting the word. Right. It's living the word. Right. Because it's living and it's living in us. And we're supposed to love others like we love ourselves. Yep. And love overcomes everything. I haven't found nothing yet that love doesn't overcome. And I also found that there's a measure of love. And we grow in love. It's a process.
It's a process.
It's a process.
It's a journey.
A journey. And I find that, I need more of it every day.
Yeah.
I haven't come to the end of it. I haven't found the end of it. But I can tell you one thing, it works.
Yeah. So Satan knows the scriptures, quoted them to Jesus, right? Just because you know scriptures doesn't mean a thing. So that's one of those metrics. Well, he knows his Bible. Yeah, but if there's no love, then knowing your Bible does you no good. Okay, that's the point that Paul is driving home here. Brian.
Yeah, and another example I can think of is abortion clinics that get blown up, by religious groups or organizations.
Right.
And, what abortion obviously is wrong, but how they're handling it is wrong too, because now the world looks at that and says, you see how Christians are?
Right.
You see how, and then they'll start pointing the finger at us as if I'm the one who did it.
Right, precisely. If it's not rooted in love, listen, what's going on right now in our cities, there absolutely should be protest. There absolutely should people take to the streets, march, and say, we're not standing for this injustice. But when you start burning buildings down, setting cars on fire, throwing bricks at people, you know what? You just crossed into illegitimacy. What was a totally valid argument has become invalidated. And when you do that, what happens? The whole focus shifts. which is, what people who are thinking are saying, whoa, 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 whoa. You're making this something else. You are actually doing damage to the memory of this man. Keep it about the man. Don't keep it about your rage, and at this point, it's not even their rage. It's free things that they can steal from Target. Okay? And so you got to process life through the right filters. And when you're dealing as a Christian, there's only one filter that should define you, and that's love. That's love. Just before you speak, you got to ask yourself, is this love? Just before you do anything, you got to ask yourself, is this love? Because if you can't say this is absolutely love, then you shouldn't do it or say it. Okay? Yeah, let's get a mic over here and then a mic over to Rick and then one to Cliff.
Tess. I was going to say, Pastor, we all know love and experienced it, but I think Tony over there mentioned it's different dimensions of love. And so it's hard to master. It's impossible to master all the dimensions of love, whether it be brotherly love, marital love, parental love. So it's different dimensions. But in order to love like Christ wants us to, we got to completely give ourselves to it. But the thing about that is we get scared. It's a lot of fear. It's a lot of fear that's involved. And like you just mentioned about dealing with homosexuals, God might lead us to preach to them or witness to them, but we afraid of what people might say when we bring them to church, stuff like that. And as the body of Christ, we scared to love people unconditionally because we know for a fact we gonna get hurt. It's gonna be some type of pain involved, Whether when we think about one of the sisters in church service going to the altar, somebody stealing her purse, things like that. When we open ourselves up to love, we already know it could be some pain coming our way.
Yeah, this is the vulnerability of love. And it's part of what Jesus endured, right? Jesus is the epitome of love. No greater love has any man than this, that he lays down his life for his friends. Well, that cost Jesus everything. That cost him his rights. That cost him his freedom. It cost him his health. It cost him his life. It cost him everything, right? So there's consequences to loving. And that's why it's a hard journey. But it's what we have to do. It's defining. It's defining. Okay, who's got the mic? We got Rick and then Cliff.
So I've been noticing lately there's a lot of religions that, well, not lately, I've just noticed. There's a lot of religions that claim to know who Jesus is. They claim to know that, he is who he is or whatever, but they hate. And it's contradictory to me because Jesus said the two greatest commandments are based in love. You got to love God with all your heart, mind, and spirit, and love your neighbor as yourself. And I remember you preached a sermon one time, who is my neighbor? Your neighbor is everybody. Right. So you got to love everybody as you love yourself. Like the two greatest commandments are love, but if you are in a religion that says, I know who Jesus is, but you hate, you're not even following what Jesus is saying. Like there's groups that hate people just because they're not like them, and they're a religion, and they claim we're from Jesus, but they hate people.
Yeah.
So like, what's the point?
It doesn't sync. It's the symbol that's offbeat. You claim to be a Christian. Christ modeled love. You don't. You model hate. How can you be a follower of Christ? How can you call yourself a Christian? And hate comes in a million different packages, In the Jesus People movement, hippies were getting saved by truckloads. Long-haired, dirty hippies. And most of the churches closed the doors and wouldn't let them in. You can't come to this church. I took a young lady to a revival service one night, and the redneck pastor called me out in front of the whole church. Think that long hair is going to get you to heaven? Well, Guess who never went back to that church? Guess who left the service early? I'm a brand new convert. I'm just starting out as a Christian, and I'm thinking, whoa. I sure am glad that the Christians I know aren't like that. God in his rich mercy put me initially in with people that actually were doing their best to love. But hate comes in so many different shapes, so many different sizes. And you gotta go into your own heart and root it out. Because you think that your position is legitimate, but if it's not love, not only is it not legitimate, it's annoying. It's a nuisance. It needs to be done away with. Okay, Cliff.
The protest on the street and all, and with a good heart, you might want to address this, and it sounds Christian in the beginning. Here come a lot of people saying, well, let me help you, and he picks up a brick and throws it somewhere, and then the group goes and burns the building down. So now John said, what association does darkness have with light? So you can't homogenize those things. Right. And like when you go out on outreach, you got to be done with love, or Satan is going to come into it, and you cause a big mess. And yep. You didn't intend for that to happen, Yep. We have to be aware of the things you say, things you do. You have to watch very carefully, otherwise Satan will be right in the middle of it, and he'll ruin
Yep.
it.
Yep. And so Jesus said the wheat and the tares were sown by the enemy. So there's something legitimate, a good, healthy harvest, but Satan sows things into it, and he sows loveless people into it, and he sows problems into it. Okay, Brian, let's get the mic to Brian, and then over here to Frank.
Ironically, everybody wants to be loved, so even the ones that don't love expect to be loved, and it's just crazy.
Yeah, love is the deepest longing of the human heart. It's in all of us. We want love. But even when we're unlovable, we want love. Right? We can be as mean, nasty as we want to, but if somebody doesn't treat us with love, wow, that's wrong. Right? And it is. End of day, it is. End of day, there is never an acceptable reason to say I don't have to love. Because Jesus said, love your enemy. And at that point, he moved the whole thing into a completely different arena. Love your enemy. Love people who despitefully use you. Whoa, I love them. I love them with a brick. Right? Despitefully using me? No, we're not doing that. But that's how far this goes. It goes to the cross. It goes to Jesus looking into the eyes of the men who put him there and saying, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Frank.
Oh, yeah. Do you know who Brandon Tatum is?
Who?
Brandon Tatum.
No.
Okay, he's an ex-black police officer from Houston. Or he's from Arizona or something. But he loves
Somewhere on the planet.
He loves President Trump. He's a Christian, and he says, I tell it like it is. And he was commenting on the rioting, and it has to do with what we're talking about. He brought up an example. He goes, why are all you black people hating so much and doing what you're doing? He goes, when you should try to be helping each other instead of burning down your brother's stores and everything that'll never be open again. He goes, and you're doing all this on this pandemic and everything. And he says, there's a lot of you Baptist ministers out there too. He goes, where's the love? He goes, you're out there supporting all this stuff, but you know what? He goes, check your hearts. What about Jesus? You're supposed to be loving like he does. And if you guys can't figure this out, you guys need to get out of ministry. You need to start loving these people instead of supporting them.
Yeah. Where's the love? $1 million question. Get over here to Kevin and then to Raul here. Going to Raul. We got a mic over here to Kevin. Give him the mic.
Give me the mic.
Give him the mic.
I was thinking about the scripture about the like Satan being the ruler of this world.
Yep.
So my question is, do you think it's more hate than love, or is it that love isn't consistent? Like I love you until this, you know.
That's probably more common. Let's say it's more common, more ubiquitous. I love you until you don't do things my way, until I'm not happy with you, whatever it may be. But I would say that there is always an element that has gone beyond that. And they have embraced hatred. They have embraced racism. They have embraced class hatred. They have embraced all kinds of different things that's their particular thing. And here's the problem. In Hebrews, it says, be careful lest a root of bitterness springing up within you defiles many. So what happens is when you let a little of lovelessness in, when you let a little of anger and a little hatred and a little of these things we're talking about, it spreads. It spreads through the tree. And the whole tree gets defiled by it. Because you've started here, it's something controllable, but sin never remains controllable. It always moves into an arena that's out of control. And so it depends on where you are in the progression. But I would say most people, it's an inconsistent love, especially amongst Christians. I think most Christians try, right? We try. How many of you try? I'm trying to love. I'm really trying. But you fall short sometimes, and you don't respond with love. So, we're not perfectionists. We don't believe that if you're not perfect in love, then you're not a Christian. We simply believe that if love isn't what's driving you, then you're going to end up going the wrong direction, and you're going to end up not being a Christian. You're going to end up being a clanging gong. Raul.
I think that we need to begin to know that it's going to cost us. We need to pay the price, and that's what we easily say, oh, I love, but when it comes down to paying the price, you don't want to pay the price. So
right.
Do you truly, really love? I mean, we think of the Good Samaritan. These religious people walked by him. Now, did they not know what to do? I believe they knew what to do,
yep.
but they didn't want to pay the price.
Right.
And somebody comes and not just helped, but paid the price. He left money to help this person and said, hey, when I come back, whatever he owes, I'll pay for it too.
Right.
But that's our whole problem. We just say, hey, I love, but we don't want to, hey, I'll give you a flyer, but I'm not going to pick you up, okay? I'll have somebody to pick you up, but I'm not going to pay the price.
Beautiful. The Good Samaritan parable is again defining, and as Jesus compares religion with an act of love. And so we can talk about this. And here's always the danger, right, of Christianity is it becomes philosophical, becomes academic. We know, but we don't do. That's why James said, be doers of the word and not hearers only, right? Okay. Alexa. Alex.
I was recently challenged just with saying it in love to my family. Like, it's always hard trying to witness to your family and trying to tell them that they're backslidden and getting frustrated with them because they're like, no, I've been saved for so many years. And you're just like, no, you're not. And so it's recently when I was talking to my mom, and it was so hard for me to just like not get frustrated because she doesn't know, she didn't know what backsliding meant. And she always thought like that I was trying to be better than her, them. Like, oh, I'm saved, but you're not. And I was just like, no, that's not it. Like, I'm just saying, like, yes, I'm a sinner too, but I'm just telling you, like, you think you're saved and you're really not. And so, like, me, like, toning it down and just trying to say it, like, as nicely as possible without getting frustrated was just so hard. But, like, it finally, like, broke through to her, and she, like, broke down and was just like, oh, wow, like, I really am not saved. and I got to pray with her and stuff. And so it's just like, gosh, like that was so hard. But then it's just like that opened the door for me to be like, treat the same people that I treat here, treat them or treat my family like the people that I love and I treat here, you know? And it's hard sometimes because family's just family and you're just like frustrated with them and you're just trying to break through. But if you just say it in love, like it will get through to them some way.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you look back on it and you say all those months, perhaps years, of running my head into the wall and getting nowhere. And really all I had to do was back it off a little bit, turn the heat down, listen a little. You know, it's always good to listen and listen to what they're saying, because that way you get insight into where the breakdown's coming. Oh, I see what you think. You think that I think I'm better than you. No, let me explain this. I'm actually worse than you. I had a great shot once we were doing a park outreach, and this guy was he was off the rails. He's drunk, and he's cussing us out, and he's doing all that. And so I just kind of took him under my arm and kind of walked down, and, "Hey, you hypocrites," and you everything. And I just looked at him, and I said, "Hey, dude, you have us so wrong." I said, "You're probably a better person than I am." And it's just like, "What?" I said, "Yeah, you're probably a nicer guy. You're just upset. You're angry. But you know what? I'm just a sinner, dude. That's all we are, sinners. We're trying to help you meet Jesus, who loves you incredibly." And the whole thing just diffused, right? All you had to do was just give the guy a little respect, give the guy a little room, let him vent, work it out, and the next thing you know, you actually are having a conversation with someone, and it's productive. He didn't get saved, but he said, "Well, I'll leave you alone." And he wandered back into the bar. Okay? But really, it's just using tact and wisdom. Kanika.
Yeah, the scripture keeps coming to mind through everybody's like examples or testimony, personal thing, and it's love covers a multitude of sin.
Right.
And when you think about that, you think of that in the context of relationships, you know, and what's happening. And recently, I shared this story. I just felt I should share it myself. I shared this with a select few brothers here in the church, but recently I had a incident with my sister. We had an intervention with her health issues, and just to summarize it really quickly, we basically told her, "You can't drive anymore, you know, take the car keys from her." Took the car, like, I got the keys, then I gave it to my mom. And so basically I was getting ready for church that night. I was at my mom's house getting ready to go back to the, the live stream service and whatnot. And so she's tripping out. I'm about to leave. Where are my keys? Where are my keys? We go out to the street. She's blocking me from getting to my car. I push her out the way. It looks bad, but I'm like, I gotta go. Told her I don't have the keys. Basically, some random guy comes down the street. He thinks I'm beating her up. I'm in my car. He punches me in my face. Nearly knocks me out. Like, it was I haven't been punched in a long time. And so I forgot what it felt like to get punched. And so I was like, man, I stopped and I was like, man, he just punched me. And so split second I had to think like, man, and immediately it was like something took over. It was like, if I had a gun right now, I would have shot him. I would have done something I would have regretted. But I stopped. My sister looked. He stopped. He looked. He's like, okay, he's not going to respond. And he goes away. Like, I get out the car, and I'm like, I'm just standing there in the middle of the street. He's living down the block. And I say, man, I forgive you. I'm looking around. I'm like, hey, man, I forgive you. You don't know what's happening on, but I forgive you. I'm a Christian, you know. And that was it. That's all I said to him. And I'm literally sitting there. My mom comes back to the house. She's like, who hit you? Who hit you? He has no right punch. Like, just leave it alone, Mom. She says, I can have this block shot. I'm like, do not do that. No, it's okay. It's okay. It's over. I needed that punch, you know. Anyway, so, but anyway, it came like, within that, me and my sister got closer because of that. She saw how I responded. She saw how I reacted. She saw that I still loved her after that. You know what I mean? So.
Amen. That's literally taking one for the Gipper. Okay. Well, we're out of time. We'll pick it up next week.